You're listening to Forward Faster, bite-sized insights for entrepreneurs.
Hey everyone, welcome to the NextCorps Forward Faster podcast. This is Matt Foley. I'm the Director of Startup Incubation here at NextCorps. And today I am joined by Jason Barrett, who is the founder of Black Button Distilling, which is the fastest growing distillery in the Northeast and second in the nation. Jason, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Cool. So for people listening that may not be familiar, maybe they've been living under a rock, can you tell us more about Black Button Distilling?
Yeah, so Black Button Distilling was founded 8 years ago when I left my accounting job in DC and moved back to my hometown of Rochester to make grain-to-glass spirits, which is kind of our take on the farm-to-table movement. So we work directly with farmers, bring in the best agricultural products, and then convert them in the distillery to high-end spirits. So what started out as a one-man band, now we have 80 employees. We distribute in 14 states. We export to. We're quite a little engine that could.
Awesome. So you moved back from DC. What prompted you to start Black Button?
So I was working for an accounting firm at the time. I was working with a different small business every day. I just wasn't finding, I was helping people live their dreams, but wasn't finding it terribly fulfilling myself. I had been a long time home brewer where I was making beer in my kitchen on the weekends as a hobby. And I ended up with a distillery as a client. And as I got to know the business from them and got thinking about what I wanted to do with the later part of my 20s, I decided I didn't want to work in corporate America and wanted to venture out in small business.
Okay. So you were 24, is that right, when you started the company?
24 when I started the business, yep.
Okay. And tell me about some of the challenges being a 24-year-old founder. Were you a solo founder as well? Was it just you at first?
Yes. So my father actually retired shortly after I started the business, not related to it, but he became my first employee.
Okay.
So there was some help along the way, but it was an interesting endeavor. But yeah, I was solo founder. It was just a lot of hard work, finding a space that was properly licensed or could be properly licensed, working through the licensing paperwork, which takes almost a year with both the various state and federal agencies. Distilleries and breweries and wineries pay a lot of excise tax. And so you have to prove to the federal government that you are a responsible steward of that tax that you owe them. And then there was, building out the facility. We were in a beautiful historic building that was built in 1892. But that comes with some unique challenges, like none of the walls are straight. And it didn't have a floor when we moved in. So we had to pour a new concrete floor. So it was just a major build out, with all the various trades to undertake. And then getting the recipes right. I had gone to some distilling schools, had a pretty extensive knowledge, but then definitely learned a lot those first couple of years as we were running our equipment with our recipes. And then just the challenges of modern business. How do you hire the right people, make the right investments, do the right marketing to grow the brand?
Okay. So, a lot of the startups that we work with, fundraising and getting the money raised to get the business off the ground is a challenge. How did you raise the money to be able to front the facility and get everything started?
So the first, we were able to get an SBA loan for the equipment. Okay. So it's a heavy equipment investment. I had bought a house, a fixer-upper when I lived in DC and done a lot of that work myself. So I was able to parlay the equity from that into my contribution. So between my investment and the SBA loan, we had about $500,000 CapEx to get started. Okay. By the time the build out was done, we had spent about $600,000. So that was a little bit of a problem. We were underwater the day we started. The first few years, we spent a lot of time making products for other people, contract production, where we were the facility and it was their brand. It's twice the work for half the money, but they pay up front. So that was a long slog those first couple of years. And then we were slowly able to dig our way out of that hole. We were able to do a little bit of private debt those first few years. So we borrowed $100,000 at a 13% interest rate. But it was a balloon payment due 3 years later. And we exclusively used that money to make whiskey. The only reason we were willing to pay 13% was because we knew that our investment would pay that off in time. Okay. So then, in years 4, 5, and 6, there were additional SBA loans in order to fund growth of the bourbon, which again took a lot of cajoling, talking to 10 banks for every one that would say yes. And then in 2018, we started discussions with Constellation Brands, and in January of 2019 closed a Series A funding round with them as a strategic venture partner.
Great, congrats! That's awesome. Yeah, so you were 24 when you started the company. What do you see as the benefits and drawbacks of being a young founder?
I mean, one of the benefits was that I didn't have a lot of other responsibilities. So, there wasn't. I'm not saying there wasn't pressure, but I didn't have a house. I didn't have kids. If it all went belly up, I would be 30 years old and have to go out and get a job. One of the downsides of being younger, I think it sometimes made it harder for banks and other institutions to take us seriously. And I only had 3 bosses from getting out of college to starting my own company, and in many ways I learned a lot from them because none of them were very good bosses. So I generally try to not treat my staff the way I was treated. But I recognize that I think if I had 3 or 4 years of working for someone I would consider a good boss, that would have helped me. There's a lot of things I had to learn on the fly. So I mean, I think if people have the passion and have the have accumulated the expertise, that'll do it. I was very fortunate that by being involved in so many small businesses from the accounting side, I really got to see a lot of different management structures and how to handle restaurants, manufacturing, distribution, sales through my clients. So in some ways, that was a sped up process. A lot of learning in a condensed amount of time. At the time, it didn't seem crazy to me at all. As I look back, the idea that a bank lent a 24-year-old $500,000 to go make whiskey for a living was pretty crazy. Now, I'd been working on the business plan for 2 years. I'd gone to 5 distilling schools. I was putting up the better part of $250,000 myself. There was a lot going for the business plan that was very well researched, and I had run it by a number of other people that were in the industry to check my assumptions. But I also think it's important that people know that a business plan is just where you start. You can pretty much guarantee that's the only thing that's not going to happen is whatever you planned for.
Is whatever's in the plan. Absolutely. Okay.
But you also tend to have the point of doing the business plan and doing it very well is that then you know what levers to pull and push as you are making your adjustments in real time.
Sure. So going back, would you have done that exercise and written the business plan, or would you have skipped that?
Oh, I think the business plan was hugely helpful, and actually for a number of years, I would continue to update the business plan annually. We now have an annual planning process that is a little different, but we have real data to base it on. Okay. But I think there's a lot to getting it out on paper and a lot to writing it yourself. I had an active consulting practice in this industry for quite a while, and a lot of folks would sort of be like, hey, can I see your business plan? And then I'll modify it for myself. And it wasn't out of a lack of wanting to share. We're a pretty collegial industry, but it was not wanting to rob them of the knowledge and the experience it takes to go and do it. I mean, one of the ways you wouldn't go run a triathlon without training first. Mm-hmm. The business plan is the training.
Yeah.
Because when you're in the thick of it, you're running and gunning, and you have to be able to make decisions quickly.
Yeah. Great. You mentioned that you were doing contract manufacturing at first. So did you not have your brand out there when you very first started?
We did. It was pretty much just contained to Rochester. So, I mean, right when we opened, we had vodka, we had citrus forward gin, we had unaged corn whiskey. We'd run our tasting room on the weekends, and we were in maybe a dozen to 24 liquor stores just around Rochester. And then most of the week, probably 1 week a month, we'd be making our products, and 3 weeks a month during the week, we'd be making somebody else's. And over time, as we started to grow, got our first sales reps, started getting accounts in Buffalo, Syracuse, Ithaca, we were able to go to where half the plant was us and half the plant was other folks. And even as recently as 2018, we probably 10 to 15% of our plant's capacity were going out the door as other people's products. 2020 is really the first year where it's 100% us.
Wow, that's great. That's great. So you've got a great brand. You've got a great brand and reputation. What advice would you give to entrepreneurs that want to build as powerful a brand as you've built?
I mean, I think the earlier that you can really get crystallized what the brand means, what the brand guidelines are, why you want it to be this way. We also tried to really stick with the original designer who did we've only had 2 designers work on the brand in the 7-year history. I think if you're outsourcing it to lots of different people, you get you just get different artistic takes on things. I think our brand is also there, it's clean and simple. If you line our bottles up, they all have a form, kind of a way about them. So they look like they belong together. That makes it easier to make the 4th and the 5th product when you already sort of have a structure to build on. So those are my suggestions. I also think people want to make sure that they're accounting for some of that. I mean, we got quotes everywhere from $10,000 to $180,000 to do the original brand work. We ended up picking a smaller local studio that did it for about $35,000. That's a pretty major investment when you're counting every dollar. But I fear I'm glad we didn't spend $150, but I think people have to look at that as an investment, especially if it's a consumer packaged good. People buy with their eyes. What's in the bottle will get you the second purchase, but what the bottle looks like on the shelf gets you the first one.
Yeah. How do you decide? What's the process like internally for coming up with, and externally for coming up with new SKUs and new product ideas?
A lot of them come from our staff. Various folks will throw out different ideas. Depending on how interesting that sounds to me, we may try it. And then if we try it, we start sort of showing people what it tastes like. And we sort of gauge response from there. Is it something we need to tweak? Is it something that we're not going to pursue? We probably do R&D on about 10 times as many SKUs as we bring to market. There's a whole library of things that we've made that have never come about. We luckily have a small research and development still that can make about 100 bottles at a time before we have to scale things up to our production batch of 1,000 bottles. So we're kind of always innovating, always trying different things. As now that we have a dozen or 2 SKUs, it's getting hard. It's getting harder and harder to launch new ones, only because we now do so much more to support each product. So actually this year we're in the process of narrowing down some of our less popular SKUs so that in a year or 2 we can try building up some new ones. So we still do that research and development. We try things, but a lot of, it's getting harder and harder to bring those to market.
Yeah. So you got quite a bit of news coverage because when the pandemic hit, you kind of pivoted the business a little bit into the hand sanitizers. Can you tell us more about, what the thinking behind that was and how that went?
Yeah, so it was more than a little bit. That's pretty much all we did for March, April, May, and most of June. Wow. So when the pandemic was just starting to roll out, there was a call from Governor Cuomo. They were asking businesses to voluntarily close. And the thing about our operation is that everything takes about 3 weeks. So when you start something this Wednesday, you have more steps for it next Wednesday. You have more steps for it the week after that. So we can't just not come in one day. We have billions of yeast cells in various stages throughout the fermenting process. And it would be quite a nightmare to come back to that if they were left unattended for weeks on end. So once they were calling for a voluntary, we were afraid that it would become mandatory. So we started putting the plant into a state of shutdown, which involved starting to furlough some of our staff, because if there wasn't going to be more work, we couldn't keep them. And that was really heartbreaking. I mean, some of these are guys I've worked side by side with for 3 or 4 years. They were very frightened as to what unemployment would mean for their personal financial family situations. And so there was a really strong desire to want to solve that as quickly as we could. And then the next week, the FDA had put out this notice, this recipe basically of here's how you can take high grade vodka and make hand sanitizer. And we happen to have a few hundred gallons of vodka built up in our storage banks. So we started calling some of the local hospital systems, and it turned out there was a huge need. I mean, basically, as soon as people were calling me back, it was how much can I have and when can I have it?
Wow. Okay.
So we called we followed the FDA recipe. We called our staff back, made about 5,000 bottles that first week and delivered them to Rochester General and Rochester Regional Health. And then the news, got wind of what we were doing, and the orders just started to pour in. So it went from 5,000 bottles the first week to 20,000 bottles the second week to 50,000 bottles the third week to ultimately 70,000 bottles a week. Wow. And our facility is only built to do about 4,000 bottles. So this was and this is not a product we tend to make. It's not that different from ours, but it's got some nuances. We had to totally change our packaging from, glass and really high-end look to a plastic that was more durable. And if it was dropped in a hospital setting, it wouldn't create shards of glass. So we had to totally rework that with vendors we'd not dealt with before. We were selling to people we'd never sold to before. And we're operating at like 28 times our rated capacity. Well, our staff has to maintain social distance. We were running 2 shifts, so we had to keep those 2 shifts separated. And it really took all 83 employees to pull this off. And ultimately, by the end, we'd made 500,000 bottles of hand sanitizer, and we're still making it today, but the volumes have dropped to about 20,000 a month, which again, that's more than double what we would normally make. But we built out enough of a supply chain that now that only takes us a few days.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. So you're 8 years into this entrepreneurial journey. Is that right? At 2014, is that when you started?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. What would you say is the most surprising thing you've learned about starting and running a business?
I mean, I think the biggest surprise to me was the similarities that all businesses have, whether it's running a restaurant, running a distillery, I've got friends that run machine shops. It all comes down to the people, the product, and how you can coordinate those people. So the similarities to all business have sort of surprised me. I think the second thing for that is just the people. I've worked with some really great coworkers. We've got people that go above and beyond every day, and we've had our share of not good coworkers that had to go. And if somebody's not carrying their weight, or if they don't fit with the company ethos, they can't stay. And those are always tough conversations, but I think it's better to have that conversation early and free that person up to go after somewhere they can be successful and recapture the time that your organization needs to find the right person for you.
Yeah.
So hiring and firing is so key to getting a good staff, and it's very draining.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. So you mentioned, you started with an accounting background when you were in DC. How important do you think it is for the founder or founders to have that kind of financial acumen on their founding team, or is it something that can be hired out? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a combination. I think anybody that is going to run a business needs to really understand basic accounting. You can hire out someone actually doing your accounting, but you need to be able to look at your P&L and your balance sheet and understand where your cash is going and understand how the things you do on a day-to-day basis impact that cash, because cash is king. And if you can't properly manage the cash you have, you won't be around very long. Yeah. And we, especially coming from a very scrappy startup, we've always pinched every penny. I mean, the desks in our office came from the M&T warehouse in Buffalo, where they sell off used bank furniture. $10 for an office chair. It's almost as nice as the $200 one you can get on Amazon. You saved $190. Our office space is $6 a square foot. Wow. You can afford to have a little more space when you're paying next to nothing for it. Mm-hmm. It's not, the big, beautiful wood paneling, great view, but it gets the job done. And again, we get to keep all that extra cash. And I think I think we've had people that have not come to work for us because we didn't have an attractive enough setting, but I'm not sure they would have been the employees that would have been right for us anyway. I try to hire people that treat my money as if it's their money. And we do give our staff a lot of latitude. I mean, pretty much every employee has a company credit card. They have rules for that card, but they don't have to do reimbursements. They can charge, what they need for the company on the credit card. It's not to say it's never bitten me, but I'm wandering from your question. Sure. I think it's really, really important to really understand your P&L statement, your balance sheet, and your cash flow statement. Because if you don't understand where your cash is going, I don't know how you can make good decisions on your business and plan for the months ahead. Okay.
What would you say are the top 3 attributes or things that make a successful entrepreneur?
I think the first one is probably relentless. I always find it interesting. I don't know that there's a huge difference between me and my department heads, except when there's a problem, my department heads can come to me. And when I have a problem, that doesn't mean there aren't people I go to ask for help, but you have to solve it. Mm-hmm. If you're having a problem with a federal regulatory agency, you have to get to the bottom of it because there is no one else. So that just dogged relentlessness is important. I think decisiveness is important. I've watched, you have to keep the meetings moving forward. You have to keep looking for next steps. I don't want to talk about things. I want to do things. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean we don't have to talk about them to figure it out. But once we've looked at the field and made our decision, we have to go with that because time's a wasting. And then probably the third one would probably just be like an internal sense of optimism, because entrepreneurs are the only people that'll work 80 hours a week for themselves so they don't have to work 40 hours a week for somebody else. Yeah. There's got to be an easier way to make a living than running your own company. You couldn't drag me back to my accounting days, with all the oxen around. So if you love what you're doing, if you love the people you're working with, it doesn't mean you're going to love every day. But you got to have that you got to get back up tomorrow after having a bad day and put a positive spin on it. Yeah. Because you've got people looking to you for leadership, and if you're not excited to be there, they're not going to be excited to be there.
Yeah. How do you stay positive? How do you maintain that?
Well, we have a lot of bourbon around, so if we have a bad day, we're able to have a drink and relax a little bit. I think some of it I am just fairly naturally optimistic. And it, especially after 6 years of seeing it, it does tend to all work out. It doesn't always work out the way you want it to, but if you work, kind of a faith that if you're working hard every day, and you make good decisions, yes, you'll get kicked a few times, but for the most part, it tends to work out. I also then spend most of my weekends out at my farm in Naples. So I find being out in nature and disconnected from the world very helpful. I definitely didn't get to do that in the early years. I mean, I actually lived at the distillery the first year. I had a futon in my office and 7 days a week was there 14, sometimes 24 hours a day. So having now graduated to a point where I can trust my team to take care of things on the weekend and I can kind of go out and disconnect, that's been a big thing for me.
That's cool. That's cool. So what's next for Black Button?
So, I mean, 2020 was going to be a big year for us. We were going from selling in basically 3 states, New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts, to 14 states. And we had just finished all the licensing paperwork for all of that. So we are available in Texas and Florida and Colorado and Illinois and Massachusetts and Maryland and DC. And yeah, the list just keeps going. But our plans for that growth got massively disrupted. A lot of the ways we grow our brand is in person. So we're having to retool on a lot of that. Luckily, we were able to cut our expenses pretty quickly. So we don't have to carry a lot of those expenses. We just also don't have the revenue coming in. E-commerce is becoming a big thing. That was not even legal back at the beginning of the year. Many states have made it legal to ship liquor directly to someone's door through a common carrier. So we probably didn't do $13,000 worth of online business all of last year. In the first weekend, our new website went live. We did $13,000 in revenue, and it's just been growing from there. So one of our sales reps actually stepped out of his role as a traditional sales rep and is now running that part of the business. But I mean, that part of the business is only 7 weeks old. So the sky's the limit, but it's a whole different world than where we were. We're retooling a lot of our marketing spend. We used to do a lot of in-store demos. Now we've got to do online ads. And some of those things are working well, and some of them we're still learning about. So it's trying to find the levers that are still available to us to drive that growth.
Sure. And last question: What's one piece of advice you would give to the people that are listening to the podcast in terms of starting a business?
I mean, I always think that people spend a lot of time on the fence about whether to start a business, and if and I think people should certainly investigate it and make sure they're ready for it as a lifestyle, because it is at least for me, it's an all-consuming thing. From 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., it can take over your world. And do you have the support structure to help with that? Is your family behind you on that? But if they are, write the business plan and get to it. Because again, I have a good friend that was writing his business plan for a distillery right when I was in 2012. And he's just getting ready to launch his distillery now.
Oh, wow.
And I've been at it for 8 years, and he got too far into it, tried to schedule every product for every month for the first 5 years. You need to know generally where you're going, but it's impossible to predict many of these things. And at some point you just have to start living it. So I guess my advice, once you've decided to do it, do it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jason. Really appreciate you taking out the time to meet with us today. If people want to find out more about Black Button, where should they go?
Just hop over to our website, blackbuttondistilling.com. It tells you all about the products, the company, where to get them, both locally and if you need them shipped to you.
Awesome. Thank you. So anybody listening, if you want to see more episodes like this, visit NextCorps, nextcorps.org/podcast. And you can also find us on iTunes and Spotify. Thanks for joining us.